Hello there, my loves. My name is Hannah, and it is time for my favourite time of any reading month, which is when I choose the books that I am going to be impatiently reading. So I have, a stack of 2 books here, because 2 I'm going to be reading the ebook of, but these are 4 books that I'm fancying, I'm in the mood for, and also books that are a little prize list influenced, if I'm honest, if I'm very honest. So I will start with the ones that I actually physically have. The first is Neon Roses by Rachel Dawson, which is a Welsh book. Now you will know, if you've been on my channel for a little while, that I have been disgusted, frankly, with my lack of Welsh literature. So I was recommended this by a friend, but also loads of my friends have read this and absolutely loved it. It is, right, so this book is like, you know the film Pride? About lesbians and gays support the miners, right? But it was kind of told from the perspective of the queer community who go and help the miners in Wales. If this is not making any sense to you, don't worry, we're going to read the book. But that's what Pride is about. This is the same incident, but told from the perspective of the people in South Wales. So the striking miners and the incoming queer community who are trying really hard to support them. And I'm just really looking forward to it. I've heard wonderful things, and this has just been shortlisted or longlisted. I can't remember where we're up to. It's just been announced on one of the lists for the Polari Prize. So I'm looking forward to it, and it's blurbed by Sarah Waters, so you know. Looking forward to that one. Then another queer book, and this won all sorts last year. It won the Orwell Prize, Granta's Best Young British Novelist. Everyone was talking about it, and I meant to read it then, and I didn't, but I'm reading it now. It is The New Life by Tom Crewe, which is a historical fiction book about a relationship between 2 men, and that's really all I know about it at the minute, and that's really all I want to know about it at the minute. So they're the 2 that I'm going to be physically reading. And then the 2 ebooks. The first is Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon, which I've heard such good things about it, and I put a reservation on the ebook of this with my library about a month ago, because I thought it might be on the book along list. Now it isn't on the book along list, but I still want to read it because it sounds amazing. So this is it's set in Sicily, I think, in like 1412 BC. The Athenians have just tried to conquer Sicily and have failed, and there's loads of Athenian soldiers that are being held in prisons, and these 2 kind of, I think, like out of work, like pottery guys who are into theatre, realise that the prisoners will perform plays for them in return for food. So it's like set in antiquity and is about about these 2 guys putting on a play with a load of Athenian prisoners. So it sounds a little left field, but I've heard so many people raving about this book, including people like that I think normally have quite divergent reading tastes. So I'm particularly interested in seeing what I think of that. That is going to be the first one that I read, because I've got the reservation has come through on BorrowBox now, so I only have 12 days to read it, so I need to do that. And then the second ebook that I want to read is actually on the book along list this year. Now I have not fully committed to completely reading the long list. I'm definitely not going to vlog the whole reading experience again, because I found that a bit stressful, but I have put a bunch of library reservations on most of the books that are on the long list, and I'll get to them at some point, but I'm not putting any pressure on myself to do it. However, this one had been on my radar anyway and was one that I was interested in. It is Headshot by Rita Bullwinkel, which is, all I know about this is that it's like quite an experimental piece of narrative fiction about women's boxing. or girls boxing maybe, but boxing, ladies who box. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. So that's it. Those are the 4 books. It's the 1st of August. We'll see what the date is when I finish my first one. I am currently in the middle of a couple of chunky books that I kind of want to finish before I get properly stuck into these. But as I said, I've got the Ferdia Lennon from the library, so I do have to get to that one soon, or risk having to wait ages to get it again, because I think the queue behind me now is going to be even longer than when I first put the reservation on. So off we go to read. See you soon. The first book. We're halfway through August. Oops. But I finished the first book and I absolutely loved it. I don't have tons of time, so I'm going to attempt to keep it brief, but has she been saying that the entire time she's had this channel? Yes, she has. Has she kept it brief? Not a single one time. But we'll try. I read Glorious Exploits by Ferdia, Lennon, and I love this book. I just... you know where a book just like gets into you? That's how I feel about this book. So as I said in the little intro, this is a historical fiction book. It is set in Sicily in 1412 BC. The Athenians have just had a failed attempt to invade and colonize Sicily. And a load of Athenian prisoners of war are now being kept in these disused quarries on Sicily. They are starving, they've been there a long time. And we are following we're following predominantly one character called Lampo. And him and his best mate, Gelon, I don't know if I'm pronouncing these ancient Sicilian names correctly, but they are out of work potters. The work's dried up at their factories, and they're sort of killing time. And Gelon especially is very, very artistic by nature. He's very interested in theatre, and all of the news they're getting from abroad is that it's possible that Athens is going to fall, right? They've had this failed attempt to invade Sicily, and all signs seem to be pointing to the fact that Athens may fall. And if that happens, Gelon is very concerned that that will mean that the theatre that comes out of Athens, the Athenian theatre, in particular the works of his favourite playwright Euripides, will be lost. And part of what I loved so much about this book is that it really captured, or really kind of made clear, the importance of... I mean, I've always understood that oral traditions being obviously incredibly important prior to traditional schooling and common languages and things like that, as being like oral storytelling traditions being a very important way for cultures to understand each other, and that the sharing of ideas would have been much slower and harder to do before the printing press, or even before kind of common written writing. And it really landed with me, this idea that Gelon loves the theatre, and the only way that he is going to be able to access the works potentially of this playwright that he really admires is in hoping that some of the prisoners in the quarries have seen some of Euripides' plays and can remember some of the lines, and that's all he's got to go on. So him and Lampo go into the quarries, and they essentially bribe some of the prisoners with food to say, you know, did you ever see Medea? Do you remember any parts? Oh no, I've already heard that bit. Do you know what happens next? And they're sort of like scratching their brains because they're desperate for the food, to try and give these guys give them this access to this art that they haven't had access to. And I thought it was fascinating. And then it leads to them aiming to put on a production in the quarry using these Athenian prisoners of war of Medea and the Trojan women. And then there's this whole plot that happens that I'm obviously not going to spoil here. But I loved this book so much. It was so funny. Ferdia Lennon is an Irish author, and you can hear the Irish voice in it. My nana was Irish, and I could like hear her and kind of like Irish family members in like the cadence of the way that the prose was written, and it had this very sort of like just funny prose throughout it, but also really it doesn't shy away from the real horrors of war, of slavery, because they're Lampo. So Gellin is this kind of like he's quite a serious, poetic man. He's lost a son in recent years, and his wife has left. Did she die or has she left? I think she's left. And Lampo is very much the more kind of like up for the crack, like seems on the surface to be a bit less serious, seems to be a bit more kind of flippant, at least at the start of the book seems to be a bit more flippant, and part of the journey through the book is his own sort of understandings of these things that are happening around him, and really realizing the depth of how wrong and unnatural the human treatment that's happening is, but in a way that doesn't feel like a really heavy-handed sort of because the book in some ways is talking about, it is a cipher for colonialism. Ferdia Lennon is an Irish author, as I said, but of Libyan descent, and I think there's a character in there from Lydia, so I think there are intentional parallels being drawn, but it's just such a propulsive, fast-moving, engaging story. It's got real heart to it, and some of the writing is absolutely beautiful, but it's not a book that, despite dealing with really important issues, and I don't know if it's just because of the like time difference, like the distance that we've got from like when this was actually happening, that it doesn't feel like overawed by its subject matter or intimidated by that subject matter to the point where it's having to take itself too seriously, but it's also very clear-eyed about, I feel like I'm not making much sense because I'm a bit gushy about it. I always feel like the books that I enjoy the most, I end up being the least articulate, but honestly, I just thought this was fantastic, and it was a debut novel, and he said it took him 7 years to write, and I think you could tell it was tight. There were some parts, it's not often, I don't read a lot of kind of faster paced fiction. Generally I gravitate more towards a kind of slower pace. I am self-proclaimed as not being someone who is necessarily like for the plot a lot of the time. Like, it's not the main reason I read a book is not always for the plot. It's often more for the writing or for the ideas or for the characters or situations that are being explored, but I don't necessarily need like a ton of story beats to be hit. But I thought the plotting of this book was so tight, and like tons happens. I had to pick my jaw up off the floor at points. It made me really sad. I laughed, probably more scoffed, but laughed out loud numerous times. And I just, do yourself a favour. I'm trying to think like who I wouldn't recommend it for, because you don't need to know tons about sort of antiquity or, you know, classics or the world of that. You don't need to know tons about theatre. There's a sort of romance plot line, there's friendship, there's sort of global political commentary, but at its heart, it is just a very good, very well told story with really flawed but full characters, and I loved it. It's one of the most enjoyable reading experiences I have had all year. What a way to kick off the August reading, eh? So that's been a huge hit, and I'm sad that I got it out of the library as an ebook, because I would really probably reread that. I think it could become a sort of like comfort read book. I really, really enjoyed it. So that's that, and I'm about 50 pages into Neon Roses. I was going to say Neon Ghosts. Is that Daniel Green's book? I think that's Daniel Green's book. Yeah, so I'll be back with thoughts on Neon Ghosts once I've finished it. But for now, I'm enjoying the story of that more than I'm enjoying the writing, I think. But I think that's about to change. I wasn't 100% sure at first, but I'm getting into it now. So, hurrah! See you soon. I've had August has been like surprisingly busy, and I'm finding I don't have like tons of time to sort of sit down and film properly, which is fine. It means you're just gonna have to deal with an on the move review of Neon Roses by Rachel Dawson, which I finished reading last night. So this, if you remember, is set predominantly in Wales in the mid to late 80s. Lewin, come on darling, this way. Come this way. In the mid to late 80s in Wales, in the Welsh Valleys. So our main character is now. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation of this. The internet has not been incredibly helpful. I think it's Elined. Elined, is that right? Or Elined? Elined? Lynn. It's spelled Eluned, and I know it's not pronounced like that. So not very helpfully, I know how not to pronounce it, but not how to pronounce it correctly. If you're Welsh and watching, please help. And Eluned is the daughter of a miner, and her boyfriend is a miner, and the strikes are happening, and she's very much involved in supporting them, and she's feeling very connected to where she's from, but also a little stifled by the opportunities that there are, and the sort of the assumed direction that her life will take. She's been with her partner for quite a while, but she doesn't particularly want to get married and have babies and things like that. And then the Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners group arrives, and Elined has an encounter with a lesbian there that sort of opens up opportunities, sets her life on a slightly different track, let's say. And I found it, like, on the whole, it was a pretty enjoyable read. I didn't love it. I found the plotting was all quite episodic. So, for example, over the course of the book, this is vaguely spoilery, but not really, because this is very much billed as a queer book, and given that she's not in a queer relationship at the start, it's probably not a surprise that she ends up having other relationships with other people of other genders. And she has a few different relationships throughout the book, and anytime they end, they just sort of end quite, not without emotion, but without sort of long-lasting effects. It's just like, oh, here's this bit of the book where she's dating this person, that's over now. Here's this bit of the book where she's dating this person, that's over now. But I liked the characters. Some of the writing I thought was good, but generally on the whole, like nothing really meaty to sort of write home about. I enjoyed seeing the sort of it from the perspective of the Welsh mining community, because I only really know that storyline from the sort of queer perspective, and I enjoyed reading about that. I have been meaning to read more Welsh authors. If you've been on my channel for a while, you will know that was sort of one of the gaps that I noticed in my reading. Like pretty good at all other nations in the UK, but not brill at Wales. So I'm glad to have another Welsh book under my belt. But yeah, I found it all a little neat, and I felt a little bit like the main character got let off the hook quite a lot for some of her actions. I did find the sort of storyline with her sister. So she has a sister called Mably, which is probably, again, not how you pronounce that, and I'm sorry, please correct me. And her sister is sort of considered to be a bit of a class traitor. She's dating this policeman who's much older than her, and sort of doesn't respect her family's way of life, doesn't sort of, yeah, just very much parrots what her boyfriend says, and some of the storyline involved in that I thought was interesting and well handled, but again, perhaps not as nuanced as it might have been. But on the whole, yeah, enjoyed it. Not gonna be a favourite, but if you are just kind of looking for like something set in that period, or like a kind of like a queer romance that has some more kind of political commentary in it, I think you might enjoy it. I do think I'm a little bit of an outlier. Most of my friends who have read this really loved it, so definitely check it out if it sounds like it might be up your street. And I am also halfway through Headshot, just over halfway through Headshot actually, which I'm really enjoying on the whole, and I'll probably check in with you about that when I have finished, because I feel like I might be making you a bit seasick walking along holding the camera like this. And also I should probably pay attention to my dog. I mean, there's no one in these fields, but I should probably still pay attention to my dog. So I'm going to go do that. Tomorrow, hopefully, tomorrow is Monday and I'm off work. And if the weather is good, i.e. if the weather is cool enough, we want to do a big dog walk to the Simonside Hills up in Northumberland. So fingers crossed, that's the next thing you'll see. Has done our job right, you will have just seen some B-roll from the Simonside Hills. So we went there yesterday and it's great. I love it there. It's like not that bad a walk to say you get as high up as you do. Lou, you can lie down, darling. It's okay. Yeah, lie down. He hates it. He hates it when I talk to a camera. I think he doesn't understand who I'm talking to. So he's just like, what do you want? Poor kid. Anyway, yeah, it's a really great walk, because it's sort of like, it's like steadily uphill for a bit. And then you have like a short, sharp climb, but it only lasts a few minutes. And then you've got this brilliant long walk along the ridges of the hills. It's like not super long. It's like, I think it's about 5k, but because there's so much like up and down, it feels longer than 5k. But it was great because, I don't know if you know this, but my little Labrador is a little antisocial, and doesn't really like people or other dogs. I mean, he's got his friends, he's got his people and his dogs that he likes, and anyone else he doesn't care for. So we really like taking him like further afield, and it was really quiet yesterday because it was the school holidays, but the weather wasn't brilliant. So it was like a little bit drizzly. So I think most people go to somewhere like Simonside when it's like a really nice day. I can think of nothing worse than climbing that hill in really hot weather, but it worked out for us because we basically didn't see anyone else there. It felt like we had the entire hillside to ourselves. It was great. But anyway, that was my walk. And I did finish reading Headshot yesterday as well. So yeah, I enjoyed this. I can see why it's on the book along list. I think it's a cool choice. For the long list, I think from what I've read so far of the book along list, which is about 3 or 4. Well, I've finished. This was the second book on the prize list that I've finished, but I'm in the middle of 2 other ones. I think it's a little bit more of an experimental one, and I always like it when the booker chucks something a little bit more out there. A bit more out there in. Just really feel like I'm not my most articulate in this video, guys. Sorry. But yeah, so this is quite a short book. It's I think I read the ebook and it was under 200 pages on an ebook. I'm not 100% sure what that translates to in paperback or hardback, but not very long. And we are following the Daughters of America under 18s boxing match, the finals. So over the course of the book, there are a number of matches that are taking place between 2 teenage female boxers, and each chapter is a different bout. So we start with round 1, where we're getting 8 boxers down to 4. Okay, yeah, you can go up there. Good boy. So chapter 1 is the first one of those, and there's like a little bracket in the book that shows you like how the girls are matched up against each other. And I really enjoyed it at the start. So the chapters are describing the fighting, the fight, but I think because boxing is such a psychological sport as well, that and I think Rita Bullwinkel captured that really, really well, because what you were getting in those chapters was an understanding of why each of these girls fights the way that they do fight, and like what's on the line for them, what's at stake, because you're there in the present moment with them, but you're also seeing parts of their past, and you're also actually seeing parts of their future, and understanding what this moment in their life means for the people that they will go on to become. And I think that worked really well. It actually reminded me a little bit of, if you've read Leave the World Behind, you know, Rumen Alam would sometimes like chuck in like something that was happening in parallel, but that the main characters that we were following weren't aware of like something else that was going on over here. And the way that Rita Bullwinkel talks about the future felt a little bit like that. And it was interesting because it's the competition was so important to all of the fighters for different reasons, and yet you go on to see through the chapters that actually very few of them go on to sort of have a career or anything to do with boxing, and this ends up not being the most important thing to them at the moment, but probably they would have become different people if they hadn't been in that moment, and that if it hadn't have been like the most important thing to them at that particular time. Do you know what I mean? So I thought that it captured that really, really well, and it felt a lot like that they were fighting to become themselves in the ring. And there's a few things that the author does to really kind of cement that. So the girls are always referred to, the fighters are always referred to by their full name. So it's always like Iggy Lang, or like Artemis Victor, or Rachel Dorico, every single time. So when you're reading it, you're kind of being like battered with this girl's name in a kind of effort to like really imprint them on you. And I thought that was like clever, if a little fatiguing for the reader, if I'm being very honest. And that's kind of exacerbated by the fact that nobody else has a name. So everyone else is referred to as like Artemis Victor's coach, or like Ruby Mueller's mother, or something like that, but only the girls who are competing have full names. Like, so there's bits and pieces like that going on through it, and I liked the themes that were being explored. I was interested in the girls and their lives and how they got there. A couple of them blended a little together for me, which was a little bit of a shame. I would have liked for them to have remained more distinct. And I thought the way that Rita Bullwinkel actually talked about the fighting, both the psychology of it and the actual movement, I thought that writing was really effective, and worked really, really well. I think the problem for me was the structure, and I think it's one of those ones where she couldn't. What made the structure really effective at some points was also what made it really ineffective at other points for me, because she's following the tournament, right? So chapter 1 is the first matchup in round 1, second matchup, third matchup, fourth matchup, then we get to the semi-finals, fight, then the final. And I thought I just got a little bored of that structure. But I also think in the early chapters, that's what worked so well. But then once you've committed to that structure, you have to see it through. And I personally got a little bit bored of it by the end, which is probably not a good sign given that the book is not that long. But I actually wonder if maybe that's what made it a little bit exhausting. It got dangerously close to me feeling a bit short story-ish about it. And we know that I don't tend to gel very well with short stories, because I'm just a kind of like, I'm a curious bear who wants to know more. And I feel like short stories don't always give me, they don't always give me what I want. And so there were some bits where I was like, oh, I want to, like, she just teases you with these like little nuggets of their future or their past, and I kind of was like, oh, I want to know a bit more than that. But I also think the author was probably a bit stuck, because you kind of can't go into too much detail and have that quite repetitive structure, because it's only going to make it worse, if you see what I mean. So I don't really know what her other option would have been, but I did find it a little repetitive towards the end. There was also like a section at the end, almost like an epilogue. And for me, some of the themes and ideas in that really short section at the end, They didn't come from nowhere, but I would have liked them to have been more seeded throughout the book. And it could be that they were and I missed it, in which case, apologies, and I'm happy to be corrected. But it felt a little too like the author explaining at the end what the overall metaphor of the book was, and I didn't love that. I personally didn't love that. I would have liked to have been able to figure that out for myself, or have just been left to mull that over for myself, but totally personal preference. I thought some of the imagery was really interesting throughout it. There was lots of stuff about like layers and also a lot about like water and stuff, but I thought that some of the motifs in the imagery were, again, and this I think was reinforced by the structure, a little too repeated. Like it became a little too, anytime certain fighters were in the ring, I was sort of like anticipating the imagery that I knew was going to accompany that person, and that I think that didn't help with me feeling like the book lost quite a bit of its novelty throughout. But that being said, I did enjoy it. At the minute, it's my least favourite of the books that I've read on the long list, but I'm only a little way through, so that doesn't mean it's going to stay at the bottom. I certainly didn't not enjoy it, and I enjoyed it a lot more than some of the books from last year's long list, for example. But I'm interested in her as a writer. I think this is her debut, and I think she does write short stories, or has written short stories more beforehand, and I think you can tell, and so that it just had that quality to it that isn't my favourite. But I think if you like short stories and you want to kind of just have a book that kind of knits together these experiences of young girls in a kind of cooler novel format, then you might enjoy it a little bit more than me. It's just, yeah, structurally it didn't quite give me what I wanted, but I really liked the premise of it, and I liked the themes that that she was exploring, and on the whole, I thought the writing was really solid. It didn't blow me away, but I enjoyed it, and I thought it was good. So yeah, I would definitely pick up another novel by her in the future, but this one's probably not going to be a favourite. That being said, I don't not recommend it, so do with that what you will. Which means we're down to our final book. And I have started reading The New Life by Tom Crewe. This is a historical fiction book that is set in the the mid 1890s, the end of the 19th century. And when the opening of this book, I was like, hello, what's this? And then it does take a quite immediate tonal shift after that first chapter, which has left me feeling, at the moment, a little shortchanged. However, I think we're going to build back up towards it. That is my hope. But we are exploring the lives of at least one queer man, possibly more than one, in the 1890s, which was obviously not a fun time to be a queer man, especially. But yeah, it's quite theoretical at the minute and quite philosophical. It started very gay, very physical. It's quite an intense sex scene at the start. Sex scene? Yeah. And then it becomes much more kind of philosophical and political from there on in, which just has left me a bit like, oh, and because of that, I haven't been reaching for it as often as I thought I would, but I think I just need to get over my initial at the fact that it didn't just carry on being like a really dirty, sexy book. I'll get over it. I'll get over it. So I will carry on reading this and report back soon. As a sidebar, I'm really enjoying this on the Booker list, and I'm really enjoying Enlightenment by Sarah Perry, so... But yeah, I will go read this, and not this, but maybe this, and possibly both. Off I go. See you later.
Lads, please. I beg. This one looks like... Yeah, I knew you were going to do that.
Hi. I have finished reading The New Life by Tom Crewe. I loved this. This was so good. Okay, so I know I've briefly mentioned what this is about, but this book is principally following two men in the late 1800s, called John Addington and Henry Ellis, and they are loosely based on real people, very loosely based. The author is at pains to say in the afterword, loosely based. And these are two men who published a book in the late 1890s called Sexual Inversion, which was the terminology at the time for homosexuality, or any kind of same-sex attraction was called inversion. Over the course of the book, we are sort of covering how John and Henry sort of meet or first come across each other, because they start corresponding because of similarities in their kind of research and work that they write about, and then through to the development of the idea of the publication of this book, the publication of the book, and the immediate fallout of it. And I thought it was great. So John in the book is a gay man who he's married, he's got children, and he's at a point in his life, he's sort of a man of independent means, so quite wealthy, sort of lives off of his father's money essentially. But he's in his 50s, and he's just reached a point in his life where he's just sick and tired of being in the closet. But unfortunately, at this time in England, in the UK, you weren't allowed to be gay. So there were indecency laws at this time, which was basically like any kind of sexual act that two men did together was called an act of like gross indecency. And whether or not that was done in public or in private would equate to, I think it was like a year of hard labour. And then actual anal sex, so there were sodomy laws at the time, was life imprisonment. Just life imprisonment. And you're like, what? But that's what we had. And so, you know, there are real risks attached to any kind of sort of even slightly couched in all sorts of euphemism, but any kind of implication that this book that they're writing might actually be written from a kind of personal perspective is potentially disastrous, right, for these men. And so that's the position that John is in. Henry is slightly different. So Henry is more of a sort of, he's a writer, and he's part of a kind of free-thinking, hopeful group of sort of socialists and liberals that just feel like, so essentially don't have like skin in the game in terms of like queer rights specifically, but just feel that the laws are grossly unfair and that it is not a government's place to kind of legislate anyway on how two people consensually choose to be together, and also they're very sort of like bound up in women's rights, women's suffrage. Henry has just married a kind of intellectual soulmate in Edith, and their relationship forms part of the book as well, because they are trying to sort of live out an alternate way of being in relationships in terms of kind of sexual politics in a straight presenting relationship as well. So there's they're your kind of two main characters, and the book, as I said, follows the kind of conception and publication of this book. And it also really, and this is the bit that I thought it did so well, it really personalizes it. And this is why I think Tom Crewe's done such a brilliant job of bringing these kind of ideas, these figures to life, because all of the relationships that he's sort of invented are invention. But, you know, John's wife is knows about his sexual orientation and is pretty disgusted by it, and is very scared about what his actions might, the repercussions of his actions on their family and their daughters. And their relationship is really interesting. The relationship that Henry has with his wife is really interesting, because while Henry isn't queer, he is sort of struggling to understand his own sexual desire and identity, and how that lines up with his political opinions on what a marriage could and should be. And it's also nuanced and so textured, and all of the characters were so well drawn. Like nobody gets let off the hook. I was flitting around all over the place being like, I'm on team John, I'm on team Catherine, I'm on team Edith. Like it was just so rich in terms of dealing with these really kind of still incredibly prevalent ideas of like why it's so important that we don't attach kind of shame or any kind of sense of morality on human kind of sexual instinct, and it gets really into the weeds on things like that. I really enjoyed how it intersected with class, because John, as I said, is kind of from a very privileged background, and he begins a relationship with a working class man called Frank. Let me find you this bit that I just thought was great. So this is from one of their first conversations between John and Frank, and so Frank asks, where do you get all of your money from? And John says, my father made investments, I live on the interest, that and what I earn from my books, because he's a writer. And so Frank says, oh, so you're the problem, people like you. And he says, yes, but we are also the solution, if enough of us alter how we think. To which Frank replies, laughing, God forbid it should have nothing to do with you. Like this sort of like the examination of like classism, and how the upper class kind of free thinkers tend to think that they have to be the ones with the solutions rather than the working class people who are greater in number. But yeah, I thought it was great, and essentially what the book is sort of like, what it tracks so well through the relationships is the sort of like ethical and moral kind of contortions that the characters have to sort of embody, because they are not able to communicate clearly and transparently who they are and what they desire and what they need in a relationship because of the political climate. Just felt so... It was so well done, because it was a deeply political book, and this did win the Orwell Prize, which is a prize for political fiction, and I do understand why it did that, but it did it so well because it always felt like it came from the characters and from a genuinely human place. Like at no point in the book did I feel like, you know how sometimes you're reading a book that's on a very political topic and you get a character will stand up and essentially it's very clear that that character in that moment is a cipher for the author's opinions. It didn't really ever feel like that, and it really did. I really did feel like Tom Crewe did bestow as much humanity and complexity on the characters that were homophobic as he did with the queer characters or the characters that were for overturning these laws. And I think I really lauded that. But despite that, it's also very clear what the book's kind of perspective is. So I just thought that was balanced really, really well. And yeah, so when I said earlier that it started, because it started with this quite intense sexual scene, and then kind of did a bit of a 180 and became a much more kind of musing, philosophical, political book for a little while. And I mean, it maintained it, but it did maintain that throughout the book. But I actually think the balance of, I think it was so important for what the book was saying that those scenes are there, and that actually that scene was centered, and that the book kicked off with that. I don't think it was just like, ooh, let me put like a really kind of confrontational sex scene at the start of the book to kind of like get people like into it. I actually think it was a really important, it was important that it was placed there in terms of the book's wider messaging. And yeah, I really liked it. I really liked it. I understand why everyone was raving about it as much as they were. And I don't know, as I'm recording this, there is like increasing coverage here in the UK of like school librarians feeling under pressure to limit the number, or in some cases completely get rid of LGBTQ plus books in school libraries. And it's just so disheartening to be reading headlines like that and be reading a book that is set so much in the past, and sort of, I don't know, like what this book captured so well was like how difficult it is to understand your own identity in a vacuum. So if you are not exposed to the fact that other queer people exist and are out there, how isolating and difficult it is, and how alone you feel as a character, as some of these characters feel in the book, because you can't see yourself anywhere. And this book sort of perfectly articulates why it is so fucking important that people can and do see themselves in the media that they consume, so that they understand that they are not alone in this world, and that there are other people who kind of have similar experiences or have similar identities and art. Like, it was great. So between this and Glorious Exploits, I've had a great time. Like Headshot and Neon Roses, which I think I've done a little bit of editing of this video already so far, and I think I call it Neon Ghosts like every other time I talk about the book. I'm so sorry. I watched Daniel Green. Daniel Green is a YouTuber. He does a lot of fantasy and science fiction content. I really like him. The only reason I'm still reading Wheel of Time is because of him and his brilliant plot summaries. But he has a book called Neon Ghosts, which obviously he kind of promos quite a lot on his channel, so I just am used to saying Neon Ghosts. But anyway, Neon Ghosts, Christ, Neon Roses and Headshot, both books that I liked and appreciated, didn't love, but I think The New Life and Glorious Exploits are two of the best books I've read this year. So isn't that nice? It is currently, I think, like the 28th of August today, as I'm finishing this. So I've only got a couple of days before I'll be picking my books for September, but I'm in a little bit of a quandary about what to do with my impatient reading in September, because I am feeling the booker list this year. I don't think I can include any more booker books on my impatient reading vlogs, because that doesn't feel like what these are for. Do you know what I mean? Like, these are supposed to be for the books that I want to read regardless of what I'm feeling like socially pressured into reading. But I think that means maybe what I'll do next month, it might be like some novellas or some like shorter books, because I am enjoying the reading that I've been doing so far for the booker list. I think it's, from what I've read so far, which is about 5 of them, it's a pretty strong long list so far. I've not had any stinkers yet. A couple of like, I'm not 100% sure that needed to be on the long list, but nothing that I haven't enjoyed. So I want to carry on doing that booker reading, but I think it means that this video next month might be some shorter books potentially. But I think I've got Shy by Max Porter coming in from the library soon. I think I've got So Late in the Day coming in on the library soon, and I still haven't read any Claire Keegan, so she's definitely an impatient author. So suffice which to say, if you're interested at all in finding out what I do pick up in September, then please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and give this video a little thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, and thank you so much. And I will see you for something soon. Probably the next video after this will be my August wrap up. And without having crunched the numbers, because I don't do ratings, so it's quite hard for me to work this out because it's all vibes based, but I think August has been my best reading month in terms of like how I have felt about the books that I've been reading. So you'll not want to miss that, because, well, really your life probably won't change in any way if you miss it, but I'd be sad if you didn't join me. Okay, see you later. Bye.